The wind howled across the barren surface of Velthora 9, carrying red dust that painted the sky in shades of rust and copper. Deho wiped his scanner screen for the third time that hour, watching the readings fluctuate as his team descended deeper into the ancient structure. The ruins had been calling to them for weeks now, strange energy signatures pulsing from beneath layers of rock and time. He was not alone in this expedition. Dozens of beings from across the galaxy had gathered here, drawn by rumors of precursor artifacts. The precursors were ghosts in the galactic consciousness, a civilization so ancient that even their name was a guess. They had vanished 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only whispers in stone and metal. "Deho, come look at this." Hana's voice crackled through his comm unit. She was 20 meters ahead, her light cutting through the darkness of the temple corridor. He made his way toward her, careful not to disturb the delicate equipment that lined their path. When he reached her position, Deho understood why she had called. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, its walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the light. At the center stood a pedestal made of crystal that glowed with an inner fire, and embedded in that pedestal was a sword. The weapon was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Its blade caught the light and threw it back in shades of blue and silver. The hilt was wrapped in something that looked like leather, but could not possibly be organic after so many centuries. Energy rippled along its edge in waves, gentle as breathing. "Get Commander Vrix," Hana whispered. "He needs to see this." Within minutes, the chamber filled with bodies. Commander Vrix arrived first, his scales clicking against the stone floor as he moved. He was reptilian, tall and broad with eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came Dr. Mora, her insectoid body casting strange shadows on the walls. Then came others, representatives from a dozen different species all pushing forward to see what had been found. "Remarkable," Vrix hissed, his tongue flicking out to taste the air. "The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases." Dr. Mora approached the pedestal with her scanning equipment extended. Her compound eyes reflected the blue light 100 times over. "The materials are unknown. The age matches our estimates for precursor civilization. This is authentic." Deho hung back, letting the more senior scientists take their readings. He was just an archaeologist, a human among beings who had been exploring space for thousands of years before Earth had even invented the wheel. His role was to document and learn, not to make grand discoveries, but Hana stood beside him, her tablet already filling with images of the symbols on the walls. "Look at these markings," she said quietly. "They're different from other precursor sites. More deliberate. Like instructions. Why can you read them?" Deho asked. "Some of them. See this symbol here? It appears in precursor texts we found on Xandros Prime. It means waiting or sleeping. And this one means blood or lineage." She zoomed in on a cluster of marks near the pedestal base. "This is strange, though. This symbol doesn't appear in any database. It looks almost like a warning." The chamber buzzed with conversation as more team members arrived. Arguments broke out about protocol and procedure. Who had the right to study the artifact first? What if it was dangerous? Should they try to remove it or leave it in place? Commander Vrix raised one clawed hand for silence. "We will proceed systematically. Dr. Mora will conduct detailed scans. No one touches the artifact until we understand what we're dealing with." For 3 days, the scientists worked. They mapped every symbol on the walls. They analyzed the crystal pedestal from every angle. They tested the energy field that surrounded the sword without actually making contact. The weapon sat there through it all, patient and still, its blue light never wavering. Deho spent those days helping Hana with translations. The symbols told a story, though it was fragmented and unclear. There had been a great civilization here once. They had built wonders across 1,000 worlds. And then something had happened. War perhaps, or disaster. The symbols spoke of endings and sacrifices and hope placed in distant futures. "The sword is mentioned specifically," Hana said on the third evening. They sat together in the research tent, surrounded by screens showing different sections of the wall inscriptions. "They call it the inheritance. It was made for someone, but I can't tell who. The text keeps referring to the ones who will come and the echo of our blood." "Maybe they meant other precursors," Deho suggested. "Survivors who would return someday." "Maybe." But Hana did not sound convinced. On the 4th day, Commander Vrix announced that they would attempt to retrieve the sword. The scan showed no obvious traps or defensive mechanisms beyond the energy field. The artifact needed to be studied properly, which meant bringing it back to their ship. The entire team gathered in the chamber to watch. Vrix approached the pedestal slowly, his movements careful and precise. He had been chosen because his species was strong and his experience vast. If anyone could safely handle an unknown precursor artifact, it was him. Deho watched from the back of the chamber, standing beside Hana. He felt uneasy but could not say why. The sword had been waiting here for 50,000 years. What was it waiting for? Vrix reached out. His clawed fingers wrapped around the hilt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sword screamed. Light exploded from the weapon in a wave of force that threw Vrix backward into the crowd. Aliens scattered as the commander tumbled across the floor, smoke rising from his scales. The sword remained in its pedestal untouched, its blue light now pulsing angry and bright. Medical teams rushed forward to help Vrix. He was alive but badly burned, his claws blackened where they had touched the hilt. Dr. Mora scanned him quickly, her antennae vibrating with concern. Second-degree burns across his hands, she reported. Some kind of energy discharge. He'll recover, but he needs treatment immediately. As they carried Vrix away, everyone stared at the sword. It had rejected them. After 50,000 years of waiting, the inheritance had found its first supplicant unworthy. Daiho looked at Hana. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke, but the same thought ran through both their minds. If the sword had refused Commander Vrix, what would it do to anyone else who tried to claim it? The chamber fell silent except for the soft pulse of blue light, steady as a heartbeat, waiting still. The medical bay hummed with activity as doctors worked on Commander Vrix. His scales had cracked where the energy had struck him, and the burns went deeper than anyone had expected. He would survive, but the damage was severe enough to send a clear message to everyone on the expedition. The sword did not want to be touched, still they tried. Dr. Mora volunteered next. She was a scientist, not a soldier, and believed that perhaps the sword responded to intent. If she approached it with respect and curiosity, rather than the desire to claim it, maybe the result would be different. The entire team watched through remote cameras as she entered the chamber alone, her movements slow and deliberate. She spoke to the sword in the old scientific language, explaining who she was and what she wanted. Her voice was gentle, almost pleading. When she finally reached out to touch the hilt, she barely brushed it with the tip of one delicate limb. The response was immediate. Energy crackled up her arm and through her body. She convulsed once and fell to the ground, her exoskeleton smoking. The rescue team rushed in and pulled her out. Like Vrix, she would live. Unlike Vrix, she remained conscious, and the first words she spoke were, "It knew. Somehow it knew I was not the right one." After that, the attempts became more organized. The Galactic Council sent representatives from dozens of species, each believing they might be the ones the sword was waiting for. They came in order of seniority, then by species age, then by genetic complexity. None of it mattered. A crystalline being named Fel tried next. His body was made of living minerals, and he believed the sword might recognize a connection to the crystal pedestal. When he touched it, the pedestal itself seemed to reject him, sending fractures through his hand that took weeks to heal. Whisper came after that, a gaseous entity who barely had a physical form. The idea was that perhaps the sword needed someone who could merge with it, rather than simply hold it. Whisper enveloped the weapon completely, his vaporous body wrapping around blade and hilt. The sword began to glow brighter and brighter until Whisper suddenly dispersed, scattered across the chamber like fog in a strong wind. It took him 3 hours to pull himself back together. Deho watched each attempt from the observation room, taking notes and recording data. Beside him, Hana worked on the translations, though her progress was slow. The precursor language was complex, and much of it seemed to be written in metaphor and poetry rather than clear instruction. Another failure. Hana muttered as they watched a being made of pure energy get thrown back from the sword. That's 23 now. 23 different species, and the sword rejects them all. Maybe it's broken, Deho suggested. 50,000 years is a long time. Perhaps whatever mechanism it uses to recognize its owner has degraded. Then why does it still have power? Why does it react at all? Hana shook her head. No, it's working exactly as it was designed to work. We're just not finding the right person. More representatives arrived each day. The dig site had become something of a galactic gathering place, with ships from across known space landing on Velthera 9. Some came out of scientific curiosity. Others came because they wanted to be the one to claim a precursor artifact. A few came because they feared what might happen if the wrong species got hold of such a weapon. Political tensions rose. Arguments broke out over who should be allowed to attempt the sword next. Some species claimed ancient rights based on the age of their civilization. Others argued for genetic diversity, insisting that perhaps the sword was looking for a specific type of biological structure. A few suggested that maybe the sword was not meant to be claimed at all, that it was a test they were supposed to fail. Deho avoided most of these discussions. He was a junior member of the team, and humans were relatively new to galactic society. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 300 years ago. Most of the species here had been exploring space for tens of thousands of years before humans even existed. He had no standing to offer opinions on precursor artifacts, but Hana had no such hesitation. On the 15th day, during a heated council meeting, she stood up and presented her latest findings. "I've been studying the wall inscriptions," she announced, her voice cutting through the arguments, "and I think I found something important. The precursors keep referring to the blood of the first and the echo of origin. At first I thought this was religious language, but now I'm not so sure. I think they're talking about genetics." The room fell silent. Dr. Mora, recovered enough to attend meetings, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The sword is looking for someone with specific DNA," Hana explained. "Not just any species will do. It needs someone who carries precursor genetic markers. That's why it keeps rejecting everyone. None of us have the right biological signature." "That's impossible," someone objected. "The precursors went extinct 50,000 years ago. There's no one left with their genetics, unless they left descendants," Hana said quietly. "Unless somewhere in the galaxy there's a species that carries precursor DNA without knowing it." The implications of that statement rippled through the room. If Hana was right, then one of the modern galactic species was actually descended from the precursors. But which one? They had all tried and failed. Commander Vrix, attending the meeting remotely from his medical bed, spoke up. "Have all species tried?" Silence fell again. Deho felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. He was the only human on the expedition, and humans had not yet attempted to touch the sword. "No," Dr. Mora said slowly. "Not all species. The humans are too young," someone protested. "Their civilization barely has a history. They couldn't possibly be connected to the precursors." "Every species was young once," Vrix countered, "and youth does not preclude ancient heritage. If the sword is truly looking for genetic markers, then we must test everyone, including the humans." Deho felt his heart start to race. He did not want to touch the sword. He had seen what it did to others. The burns, the pain, the rejection. Why would he fare any better than beings who had evolved intelligence millions of years before humans? "I don't think that's necessary," he started to say, but Hana grabbed his arm. "You have to try," she whispered. "For science, if nothing else. We need to test the theory. Your theory will get me hurt. Maybe. Or maybe you're the one it's been waiting for." That night, Deho could not sleep. He lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the sword. In his mind, he kept seeing it reject person after person, species after species. The blue light pulsing like a heartbeat, the energy crackling across flesh and metal and crystal. What made anyone think a human would be different? But Hana's words stayed with him. The blood of the first. The echo of origin. What if humans did carry something ancient in their genes? Earth had mysteries of its own. Gaps in the archaeological record that no one had fully explained. What if those gaps existed because human history went back further than anyone realized? On the 20th day, after 47 different species had tried and failed to claim the sword, Deho made his decision. He would attempt it, not because he believed he would succeed, but because the unknown was worse than failure. They needed to know. When he announced his intention, the entire expedition seemed to hold its breath. Finally, they would have their answer. The morning came too quickly. Deho woke with his stomach in knots, wondering if this would be his last day without burns scarring his hands. He dressed slowly, checking his equipment twice even though he would not need any of it. The sword did not care about scanners or protective gear. It cared about something deeper, something written into bone and blood. Hana met him outside his quarters. She looked as tired as he felt. her eyes red from staying up all night reviewing her translations. In her hands, she held a tablet covered in precursor symbols. "I found something else," she said without greeting. "Look at this passage. It talks about the young ones, the ones who came after. I think it's referring to descendants. The precursors knew they were dying, and they made preparations for whoever would inherit their legacy." "That could mean anything," Deho replied. "It could mean any species that evolved after them. It could. But it could also mean their literal descendants. Their children, separated by time instead of distance." She looked at him intently. "What if humans are those children, Deho? What if our species is older than we think?" He wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. Earth's history had mysteries that no one had solved. Strange artifacts in layers of rock where they should not be. Stories of gods and visitors that appeared in cultures across the planet. What if those stories were not myths but memories distorted by time? The walk to the chamber felt longer than usual. Word had spread that the human would attempt the sword, and it seemed like the entire expedition had gathered to watch. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few looked almost hopeful, as if they genuinely believed this might be the moment everything changed. Commander Vrix was there despite his injuries, his bandaged hands resting on his lap. Dr. Mora stood beside him, her repaired exoskeleton gleaming under the lights. Even Whisper had reformed himself to witness the attempt, his gaseous form shimmering in one corner. "You don't have to do this," Vrix said as Deho passed. "No one will think less of you if you refuse." "I know," Deho replied. "But I need to know." "We all do." The chamber was exactly as he remembered it. The crystal pedestal glowed in the center, and the sword remained embedded in it. Patient as always, the blue light pulsed steadily, that strange rhythm that reminded him of breathing or heartbeat. On the walls, the symbols seemed to watch him, waiting to see what would happen. Deho approached slowly. His hands were shaking, and he clenched them into fists to stop the trembling. Behind him, he could hear the soft sounds of recording equipment, scientists documenting every moment. If he succeeded, they would want to study it. If he failed, they would want to understand why. He stopped at the edge of the pedestal. Up close, the sword was even more beautiful than he remembered. The blade seemed to contain depth, as if he was looking into water that went down forever. The hilt was wrapped in material that looked soft despite its age, and the energy that rippled along the edge was hypnotic, drawing his gaze and holding it. "Remember," Hana's voice came through his comm unit. "The inscription says the sword recognizes blood. Not strength or wisdom or intent. Just blood. If you're meant to hold it, your genetics will be enough." Deho took a deep breath, then another. He thought about his parents back on Earth, simple people who had never left their planet. He thought about his grandmother who used to tell stories about their ancestors, warriors and scholars and farmers stretching back generations. What would they think if they could see him now, reaching for an alien sword on a dead world? He extended his hand. His fingers trembled as they approached the hilt. The blue light grew brighter, responding to his proximity. He could feel heat radiating from it, or maybe that was just his imagination. Maybe that was just fear. His fingers touched the hilt. The world exploded into light, but it was not the violent explosion that had thrown back others. This was different. The light flowed into him, through him, around him. It felt like being submerged in warm water, like being wrapped in sunlight. The sword's energy spread through his body in waves, not burning but searching, reading something written into every cell. Deho gasped. He could feel the weapon in his mind now, sense its thoughts if a sword could think. It was old, so incredibly old, and it had been alone for so long. Waiting, always waiting, and now finally it had found what it was looking for. The sword lifted from the pedestal. Deho had not pulled it. He had barely been holding it. But it came free as if it weighed nothing, as if it wanted to be held. The crystal pedestal beneath blazed with light, and the symbols on the walls began to glow one by one. Behind him, someone screamed. Or maybe that was just static in his comm unit. Deho could not tell anymore. The chamber was filling with light, streaming from the walls in patterns that hurt to look at. Images flashed through his mind, visions of cities that touched the sky, of ships that sailed between stars, of people who looked almost human, but not quite, the precursors. He was seeing the precursors. They had been tall and graceful, with features that seemed familiar despite the thousands of generations that separated them. Their civilization had been magnificent, spreading across galaxies, building wonders that modern science could barely imagine. They had been curious and creative and powerful, and they had been dying. Deho saw it all in flashes. The war that had consumed them, the enemy they could not defeat, the desperate decision to send their genetic material across the stars, planting it on promising worlds in the hope that someday, somehow, their children would be ready to inherit what they left behind. Earth. They had seeded Earth. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Humans were not just another species that happened to evolve intelligence. They were precursor descendants, the children of an ancient race carrying that legacy in every strand of DNA. The sword pulsed in his hand, and suddenly the vision stopped. The light faded. The chamber returned to normal, though the symbols on the walls still glowed softly. Deho stood there holding the inheritance, and for the first time in 50,000 years, the weapon had found its home. He swayed on his feet. The experience had drained him more than he realized. His knees buckled and he started to fall. Hana caught him before he hit the ground. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." Deho tried to speak, but words would not come. The sword remained gripped in his hand, and he could not have released it if he tried. It was part of him now, connected in ways he did not fully understand. The chamber erupted into chaos. Scientists rushed forward, shouting questions and observations. Dr. Mora was scanning everything at once, her equipment flashing wildly. Commander Vrix had risen from his chair, his eyes wide despite the pain it must have caused, but Deho heard none of it. He stared at the sword in his hand, at the weapon that had rejected 47 different species but accepted him without hesitation. The human, the descendant. "What did you see?" Hana asked softly, cradling his head. "Deho, what did the sword show you?" He looked up at her, at this woman who had spent weeks translating symbols and piecing together fragments of ancient history. She deserved to know. They all did. "Everything," he whispered. "It showed me everything. And Hana, we're them. Humans are the precursors. We're their children." The words hung in the air like a declaration. Around him, aliens fell silent one by one as they processed what he had said. The implications were enormous, terrifying, impossible, and absolutely true. The sword pulsed blue light in his hand, confirming it. Deho woke in the medical bay with the sword still in his hand. He had been unconscious for 3 hours, his body recovering from the shock of connecting with a 50,000-year-old weapon. The doctors had tried to pry the sword from his grip, but it would not release. Even in sleep, he held on to the inheritance. Hana sat beside his bed, her tablet displaying streams of precursor text. When she noticed his eyes open, she smiled with relief. "You scared me," she said. "One moment you were standing, the next you were collapsing." The sword never stopped glowing the whole time. Deho looked down at the weapon. It lay across his chest now, dormant but present. He could feel it in his mind, a constant awareness like having another sense. It was waiting for him to fully wake, to be ready for what came next. "The symbols on the walls," he said, his voice rough. "Did anyone record them?" "All of them. They're still glowing even now." Hana pulled up images on her tablet. "Look at this. It's a star map showing precursor territory at its height. And this section here talks about their final days. Deho, everything you said was true. The inscriptions confirm it." She scrolled through pages of translated text, her excitement evident despite the exhaustion in her face. The precursors called themselves the originators. They explored the galaxy for millions of years, studying life wherever they found it. Earth was one of dozens of worlds they seeded with their genetic material. But something went wrong with their civilization. A war broke out, something catastrophic. "I saw it," Deho whispered. "When I touched the sword. There was an enemy. Something that came from outside. The inscriptions call them the Void. They came from another dimension or another reality. The precursors fought them for centuries and lost. Before the end, they scattered their genetic code across the galaxy. Earth, Mars, Europa, dozens of moons and planets. They hoped that life would take root, that their descendants would evolve and eventually reclaim the legacy they left behind." Deho sat up slowly. The medical monitors beeped in protest, but he ignored them. "So humans are precursor descendants. We carry their DNA. More than that. According to the inscriptions, Earth was the primary site. The precursors put most of their genetic material there because Earth had the best conditions for complex life. The other sites were backups in case Earth failed. But it didn't fail. Humans evolved exactly as the precursors hoped. The implications made Daeho's head spin. His entire species, the whole history of humanity, was the result of an ancient civilization's last desperate act. Every person on Earth carried precursor genes without knowing it. Does the Galactic Council know? He asked. They know. Commander Vrix has been sending reports constantly. Half the galaxy knows by now. Hana's expression grew serious, and not everyone is happy about it. Some species are celebrating the discovery. Others are afraid. If humans are precursor descendants, it means we have a legitimate claim to all precursor technology and territory. That changes everything about galactic politics. A knock on the door interrupted them. Commander Vrix entered, his bandaged hands still evident but his posture strong. Behind him came Dr. Mora and several other expedition leaders. They all looked at Daeho with new eyes, seeing not just a junior archaeologist but the bearer of an ancient legacy. "How are you feeling?" Vrix asked. Confused, overwhelmed. Daeho touched the sword. "This weapon, it's more than just a blade. It contains information, records, knowledge. The precursors stored their entire history inside it. We know. The walls are still displaying data. We've recorded terabytes of information already, and it keeps coming." Dr. Mora moved closer, her compound eyes fixed on the sword. "The weapon appears to be a key as much as a weapon. It unlocks precursor systems, activates their technology. There could be dozens of other sites across the galaxy, all waiting for someone to arrive with that sword." 7, Daeho said. The knowledge had come from the sword, flowing into his mind without words. "There are 7 other weapons like this one. Each was designed for a specific precursor bloodline. If we can find them, if we can find people to bear them, we could access the full scope of what they left behind." The room fell silent. 7 weapons. 7 more descendants potentially scattered across human worlds. The search would take years, maybe decades, but the reward would be immeasurable. "The Galactic Council wants to meet with you," Rick said carefully. "They have questions about the sword, about human claims to precursor heritage. Some of them are supportive, others are not. Let me guess. They're afraid humanity will use this to claim power over other species. Some fear that, yes. Others fear what you represent. The precursors were the most advanced civilization in galactic history. If humans carry their legacy, it suggests humans might achieve similar heights. That possibility frightens species who have been dominant for millennia." Daeho looked at the sword in his hand. He had not asked for this responsibility. He had just wanted to study ancient ruins and contribute to humanity's understanding of the galaxy. Now he was at the center of a political storm that could reshape interstellar relations for generations. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Vrix considered the question. "I think you should tell the truth. The sword chose you. The precursors left it for their descendants. That is fact, not politics. How the galaxy responds to that fact is beyond your control, but you can at least be honest about what happened. And if they try to take the sword from me, they cannot. We tried while you were unconscious. The sword will not release from your hand, and it reacts violently to anyone else who touches it. For better or worse, you are its bearer now." Over the next days, Daeho learned more about his new situation. The sword, which he learned to call by its proper name, the inheritance, was bonded to him at a genetic level. It would respond only to him, and would remain with him until death. Even then, it would not transfer to another bearer unless that person also carried precursor DNA. The weapon granted him abilities he was only beginning to understand. Enhanced reflexes, limited precognition, the ability to interface with precursor technology directly through thought, and most importantly, access to the vast knowledge stored in its crystalline core. He could learn things instantly, download information from the sword's memory banks directly into his mind. But there was a cost. The bonding process had changed him on a fundamental level. He was still human, but now he was something more. The precursors had designed the sword to enhance their natural abilities, and those enhancements now applied to him. He could see farther, hear better, think faster. His body was becoming a bridge between ancient precursor genetics and modern human evolution. Hana stayed with him through all of it, helping him understand the changes and documenting everything for the scientific record. She had devoted her career to studying the precursors, and now she had a living connection to them sitting beside her. "What does it feel like?" she asked one evening as they reviewed more translated inscriptions. "The sword? It feels like a part of me now. Like my arm or my heart. I know where it is at all times, what it can do, what it wants. Deho paused. And it wants us to find the other weapons. That's its primary function, to guide its bearer toward the rest of the inheritance. Then we'll find them. Together. He looked at her and saw determination in her eyes. Whatever came next, whatever political battles or cosmic revelations awaited, he would not face them alone. The sword pulsed with blue light as if agreeing. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within a week, every major civilization knew about the sword and the human who could wield it. The response was immediate and divided. Some species sent messages of congratulation, acknowledging humanity's precursor heritage. Others remained silent, their governments deliberating behind closed doors about what this discovery meant for the balance of power. Earth's government reacted quickly. They sent Ambassador Taemin, a seasoned diplomat who had spent decades navigating the complex politics of the Galactic Council. With him came Yuna, a military specialist whose job was to ensure Deho's safety. The fact that they sent a bodyguard spoke volumes about how seriously Earth was taking the situation. Taemin arrived at the dig site with an official delegation, his formal robes a stark contrast to the dusty research environment. He was in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen every kind of political maneuvering. When he shook Deho's hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. "You've caused quite a stir," Taemin said with a slight smile. "The Council has called an emergency session to discuss the precursor revelation. They want you there to testify about what the sword showed you." "When?" Deho asked. 3 days. "They're gathering representatives from all major species. This will be the largest council assembly in 50 years. Yuna stepped forward next. She was younger than Taemin, perhaps in her 30s, with military bearing and alert eyes that constantly scanned their surroundings. Her hand never strayed far from the weapon at her hip. "I'll be coordinating your security," she said bluntly. "There have been threats. Not everyone is happy about a human wielding a precursor weapon. Some factions believe the sword should be destroyed, others that it should be locked away where no one can use it. My job is to make sure neither of those things happen." Deho felt a chill run down his spine. He had been so focused on the scientific implications that he had not fully considered the political danger. Of course, there would be people who saw him as a threat. The sword represented power, and power always attracted enemies. That night, the first attempt came. Deho was in his quarters, reviewing data with Hana, when Yuna burst through the door. "Get down!" she shouted. A split second later, the window exploded inward. Something whistled through the air where Deho's head had been moments before. The sword reacted before he could think, generating an energy shield that caught the second projectile mid-flight. Blue light filled the room as the weapon came alive in his hand. Yuna returned fire through the broken window, her weapon flashing. Outside, someone screamed. Then there was silence. "Stay here," Yuna ordered, moving to check the corridor. She returned minutes later with blood on her sleeve. 2 attackers, both dead. They were using precursor tech weapons, probably scavenged from other dig sites. Someone hired professionals. Deho's hands were shaking. He looked at the sword, which had protected him without any conscious command. The weapon had its own defensive protocols, its own sense of survival. It would not let him die easily. Who would do this? Hana asked, her voice tight with fear. "Could be anyone," Taemin said, arriving with additional security. "I have reports of at least 3 different factions that oppose human claims to precursor technology. Some are political groups, some are extremist organizations, and some are governments acting through proxies. We need to leave this planet," Yuna said firmly. "The dig site is too exposed. We should move to a secure location until the council meeting." But before they could organize the evacuation, the second attack came. This time it was not assassins, but a coordinated strike. Ships appeared in orbit, broadcasting no identification. They began firing on the research stations, trying to destroy the temple and all the data it contained. Commander Vrix coordinated the defense from the command center, his injuries forgotten in the crisis. Expedition security forces engaged the attackers while civilian ships scrambled to evacuate. The sky above Velthera 9 lit up with weapons fire and explosions. "They're not trying to capture the site," Dr. Mora reported, her voice crackling over the comm. "They're trying to destroy it. They want to erase all evidence of precursor human connection." Deho watched from a bunker as the battle raged overhead. The sword hummed in his hand, reacting to the violence, perhaps wanting to be used. He could feel its power, knew instinctively that it could do far more than create shields. But he had no training, no understanding of how to properly wield a precursor weapon. "We need to get you off planet," Yuna insisted. "My ship is ready. We can break through their blockade and jump to hyperspace before they react. What about everyone else? The researchers, the scientists? Other ships are handling evacuation. You're the priority. If you die, we lose the only connection to the inheritance." The logic was cold but sound. Daiho looked at Hana, who nodded reluctantly. They had to survive this. The knowledge they carried was too important to lose. The escape was harrowing. Yuna's ship, a small but fast military vessel, launched from a hidden bay and immediately came under fire. The sword's energy shield extended beyond Daiho, protecting the ship itself from the worst of the attacks. They punched through the blockade and jumped to hyperspace just as a missile passed through the space they had occupied. In the quiet after the jump, Daiho finally allowed himself to breathe. They had escaped, but barely. "And Hana was not with them. Where is she?" he demanded. "Where's Hana?" Yuna's expression was grim. She boarded a different evacuation ship. "I confirmed she got away before we launched." "Which ship? Where did it go?" "I don't know. Communications are still jammed from the attack. We'll find her once we reach the rendezvous point." But when they arrived at the coordinates Tae-min had provided, Hana's ship was not there. In fact, most of the ships were not there. The evacuation had been scattered, vessels jumping to emergency coordinates across the sector. It took 12 hours to establish contact with the expedition survivors. When they finally compiled the list of who had escaped and who had not, Daiho's worst fears were confirmed. Hana's ship was missing. It had jumped to hyperspace but never arrived at any known destination. "She's been taken," Commander Vrick said during the emergency conference. His image flickered on the view screen transmitted from his own ship. One of the evacuation vessels was compromised. They grabbed specific targets, people with knowledge about the sword and the precursor sites. "Who has her?" Taeho asked, his voice hard. "We're not sure yet, but we're working on it." Tae-min put a hand on Daiho's shoulder. "We'll find her. I promise you that. But right now we need to focus on the council meeting. If we miss it, if we show weakness, it will only encourage more attacks." Daiho wanted to argue, wanted to demand they search immediately. But he knew Tae-min was right. The galaxy was watching. How humanity responded to this crisis would shape interstellar relations for decades. The sword pulsed in his hand, and for the first time since claiming it, Daiho felt anger flow through the bond. Not his anger alone, but something older, deeper. The inheritance remembered being wielded in battle. It remembered defending its people against impossible odds, and it wanted to do so again. "Fine," Daiho said quietly. "We'll go to the council meeting. We'll show them we're not afraid, but after that we find Hana, and whoever took her will answer for it." The sword flared with blue light, sealing the promise. The council meeting was held on neutral ground, a massive station orbiting a dead star at the edge of civilized space. Hundreds of ships gathered there, representing every major species in the galaxy. The tension was visible even from orbit, vessels keeping careful distances from each other. Weapon systems powered but not active. Daiho arrived with Tae-min and Yuna, his small delegation overshadowed by the grand processions of older civilizations. But when he stepped onto the station with the sword at his hip, conversation stopped. Everyone wanted to see the human who had claimed a precursor weapon. The council chamber was enormous, a sphere with seats arranged in concentric rings rising toward a domed ceiling. Representatives sat in species-specific environments, some in water, some in methane atmospheres, others in vacuum. Translation systems filled the air with a dozen languages simultaneously. Counselor Drek spoke first. He was a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, his voice resonating through multiple frequencies. "We are here to discuss the human claim to precursor heritage. This claim has destabilized galactic politics and threatens the peace we have maintained for millennia." Tae-min stood to respond, but Daiho stopped him. "I'll speak." He walked to the center of the chamber, the sword's weight familiar against his leg. All eyes turned to him, thousands of beings watching his every move. "I did not ask for this," Daiho said, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "I was studying ruins when I found the sword. It chose me, not the other way around. The precursors left it for their descendants, and the weapon recognized that humanity carries their genetic legacy. This is not a claim. It is a fact. A convenient fact," Drek said coldly. one that gives humans access to technology far beyond their development level. How do we know you did not manipulate the sword somehow? How do we know this is not an elaborate deception? Because 47 other species tried to claim it first. The sword rejected all of them. I have the recordings if you doubt it. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some species had witnessed the attempts personally. Others had seen only reports. But the evidence was overwhelming. A new voice spoke up, belonging to Ambassador Fell, the crystalline being who had tried and failed to claim the sword. I was there. I touched the weapon myself. The rejection was real and painful. The human speaks truth. The debate raged for hours. Some representatives argued that precursor technology should be shared equally among all species. Others insisted that the sword was too dangerous to remain in anyone's hands. A few suggested that humanity should be placed under council oversight until they proved they could handle such responsibility. Through it all, Daiho remained calm. The sword helped, its presence in his mind like a steady anchor. It showed him snippets of precursor history, moments when their council had faced similar debates. The past echoed the present in uncomfortable ways. Finally, Taman called for a vote. The question before us is simple. Do we recognize humanity's precursor heritage and their right to the sword? Or do we attempt to seize it by force? Force? Drex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think we would resort to violence? Someone already has, Yuna interjected. The attack on Velthera 9 was coordinated and professional. Ships, weapons, tactical knowledge. That takes resources. That takes backing from someone with power. The chamber erupted into accusations and denials. In the chaos, Daiho felt something through the sword. A warning. Danger approaching, get down, he shouted. The dome above them exploded. Debris rained down as ships appeared through the breach, firing indiscriminately into the chamber. The attack was brutal and efficient, clearly designed to cause maximum chaos and casualties. Yuna grabbed Taemin and pulled him behind cover. Daiho stood frozen for a moment, watching beings he had just been debating with die in bursts of weapons fire. Then the sword reacted. Energy flowed from the weapon, forming a shield that caught incoming fire. The barrier expanded, covering not just Daiho but everyone in his immediate vicinity. Aliens who had been arguing against him moments before now sheltered behind his protection. We need to move, Yuna shouted. This is an assassination attempt. But Daiho was not listening. He was connected to the sword now, fully merged with its systems. Information poured into his mind. Tactical data, weapon specifications, attack patterns. The precursors had designed the inheritance to turn its bearer into a living weapon system. And those protocols were activating. He moved without thinking, his body responding to instincts 50,000 years old. The sword flashed in his hand, deflecting fire and returning it with devastating precision. He was not trying to kill, just to disable, but the precursor weapon was efficient. Ships fell from the sky with their engines destroyed. Attackers collapsed with their weapons fused to slag. Around him, Council security forces rallied. They formed defensive positions, protecting the fleeing representatives while engaging the attackers. Commander Vrix's ship appeared through the breach, adding its firepower to the defense. The battle lasted 10 minutes but felt like hours. When it finally ended, the council chamber was in ruins. Dozens were dead, hundreds injured. The carefully neutral ground had become a battlefield. Daiho stood in the center of it all, the sword still glowing in his hand. He had protected people who had called him a threat minutes before. He had used precursor technology not to conquer but to defend, and everyone had seen it. Counselor Drex was dead, his crystalline shell shattered by debris. In the investigation that followed, they found evidence linking him to the attacks. He had been working with extremist groups, funneling them resources to eliminate the human threat. The assassination attempt had been his final desperate act. He was afraid, Ambassador Fell said as they surveyed the damage, afraid of what humanity might become, afraid of change. Fear makes people do terrible things, Daiho replied quietly. Over the following weeks, while the council recovered and rebuilt, Daiho began his real training with the sword. He found a precursor outpost, its location revealed by the weapon during the battle. The facility was small but intact, filled with training systems and knowledge databases. The sword's AI activated fully once they arrived, speaking to him in a language that bypassed words entirely. It showed him how the precursors had trained their warriors, how they had bonded with their weapons, how they had become more than human through dedication and practice. He learned to fight with enhanced reflexes, to predict enemy movements, to interface with technology through thought alone. The process was exhausting and sometimes painful, but he persevered. Because somewhere out there Hana was still missing, and he needed to be ready when they found her. The AI also revealed something else. The precursors had not just left weapons behind. They had left a warning. The enemy that destroyed them, the Void, was not truly defeated. It was sleeping, waiting in the spaces between dimensions. And it would return. When? Taeho asked. The AI could not say. Time moved differently in the Void. It could be years or centuries or millennia, but it would come eventually. And when it did, the galaxy would need defenders. That was the true purpose of the Inheritance and its 7 companion weapons. Not to conquer or rule, but to prepare for the ancient enemy's return. Taeho stood in the training chamber, the sword alive with blue light, and understood finally why the precursors had scattered their children across the stars. They had been planting seeds, hoping that when the Void returned, their descendants would be ready to fight. The distress signal came 3 weeks after the Council attack. It was faint and encoded, but the sword recognized its signature immediately. Hana was alive and she was calling for help. Yuna traced the signal to a rogue station in the Outer Rim, a lawless region where pirate clans and extremist groups operated beyond Council jurisdiction. The station was heavily defended, with multiple ships patrolling its perimeter and weapons platforms covering every approach vector. This is a trap, Yuna said, studying the tactical display. They want you to come. I know, Taeho replied. But she's there. The sword can feel her presence. Commander Vrix had joined them, his injuries healed but scars remaining. Then we go in force. I can assemble a strike team, hit them fast and hard. No, they're expecting that. They want a battle. Taeho touched the sword, feeling its energy pulse through him. I'll go alone. That's suicide, Yuna protested, not with this. He held up the weapon. The precursors designed the Inheritance to turn one warrior into an army. Time to see if that's true. The infiltration was easier than expected. The sword could interface with precursor technology, and the station's security systems were built on scavenged precursor components. Taeho slipped past their sensors like a ghost, the weapon cloaking his presence and disabling alarms as he moved. He found Hana in a detention cell deep in the station's core. She was thin and bruised but alive, her eyes widening when she saw him. You came, she whispered. Did you doubt it? He cut through the energy bars with the sword, and they shattered like glass. They said you wouldn't. They said you'd be too afraid of the trap. They were wrong. But as they turned to leave, armed figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them surrounding the corridor. At their head stood a human, which surprised Taeho more than anything. My name is Quan, the man said. He was older, perhaps 50, with cold eyes and military bearing. I'm here to take that sword from you. You can't, it's bonded to me. I know. We'll kill you first, then wait for it to unbond. Might take years, but we're patient. Why? Taeho demanded. You're human. We share the same heritage. Because that heritage is a curse. Quan's voice was bitter. The precursors left us their weapons and their wars. They made us targets. Every species in the galaxy looks at humans now and sees either slaves or masters. There's no middle ground anymore. The only way to fix this is to destroy the weapons and let the galaxy forget we were ever special. So you attacked the Council, killed innocents? I did what was necessary, and I'll continue doing it until all 7 weapons are destroyed. The fight was brief and brutal. Quan's forces had precursor weapons, scavenged from other dig sites, but they did not have the Inheritance. Taeho moved through them like water, the sword guiding his every motion. He disarmed rather than killed when he could, but his mercy had limits. Quan himself proved skilled, matching Taeho's enhanced reflexes with years of combat experience. But experience alone could not overcome 50,000 years of precursor combat programming. The sword disarmed him with a single flowing strike, and Quan fell to his knees, defeated. Kill me, he said. I won't stop otherwise. No, you'll stand trial. The Council deserves to judge you for what you've done. They escaped the station with Quan as prisoner and Hana safe. Yuna's ship picked them up and they jumped to hyperspace before reinforcements could arrive. In the quiet after the rescue, Hana hugged Taeho tightly. I knew you'd come, she said. The sword wouldn't let you abandon me. It wasn't the sword. It was me. She smiled at that, though tears ran down her face. The council reconvened 2 weeks later, this time in a more secure location. The chamber was smaller but better defended, and security was tight. Representatives filed in slowly, many still recovering from the previous attack. Deho stood before them again, but this time he was not alone. Taemin stood beside him, and behind them, a delegation from Earth that included scientists, historians, and military leaders. Humanity was presenting itself as a whole, not just through one bearer of an ancient weapon. The attacks have proven something, Taemin said, addressing the assembly. The sword is not a tool of conquest. When given the choice between power and protection, its bearer chose protection. When given the opportunity for revenge, he chose mercy. This is what humanity offers. Not domination, but partnership. Ambassador Fell stood to speak. I move that we formally recognize humanity's precursor heritage and grant them full rights to precursor artifacts and sites. Furthermore, I propose we form a joint task force to locate the remaining 7 weapons and prepare for the threat the precursors warned against. The vote was not unanimous, but it passed. Species who had been skeptical or hostile now acknowledged the reality. Humans were precursor descendants, and that heritage came with both rights and responsibilities. But the greatest surprise came after the vote. As Deho prepared to leave, the sword pulsed with sudden intensity. Images flooded his mind, coordinates and locations across human space. The weapon was showing him where the others waited. I know where they are, he said to Hana. The other 7 weapons. The sword can sense them. Then we need to find bearers, people who carry the right genetic markers. It won't be easy. The precursors scattered their bloodlines. Some weapons might be on Earth, others could be on colony worlds or forgotten stations. Then we start searching. Together. The formation of the inheritors happened quickly after that. It began as a small group. Deho, Hana, Yuna, Commander Vrix, and a handful of others who believed in the mission. But it grew as word spread. Humans volunteered by the thousands, wanting to be tested for precursor genetics. Other species joined too, offering their expertise and resources. The first additional weapon was found 3 months later, on a mining colony in the Outer Rim. A young woman named Bora, barely 20 years old, touched the weapon and bonded with it instantly. She became the second bearer, her weapon a staff that could channel energy and manipulate gravity. More followed. Within a year, 5 of the 7 weapons had been claimed. Each bearer was different, each weapon unique. But they all shared one thing. They carried precursor blood, and they were willing to accept the burden that came with it. The 7th weapon remained hidden, its location unclear even to the inheritance. The sword suggested it might be damaged or dormant, waiting for specific conditions to activate. But 6 was enough to begin the real work. Deep space scans had detected anomalies in certain regions, distortions that matched descriptions of the void. The ancient enemy was stirring, though it would be years or perhaps centuries before it fully awakened. But when it did, the galaxy needed to be ready. Deho stood in the command center of their new headquarters watching ships arrive and depart. The inheritors had grown into a true organization, respected by the council and supported by dozens of species. They trained together, studied precursor technology together, and prepared for the war they knew was coming. Hana worked beside him, translating the last of the precursor texts and building databases of their knowledge. Yuna commanded their military forces, drilling them in tactics that combined modern strategy with ancient precursor combat doctrine. Commander Vrix served as their liaison to the council, building political bridges and maintaining support. The sword hung at Deho's hip as always, its blue light a constant reminder of what they carried. Not just a weapon, but a legacy. Not just power, but responsibility. The precursors had left their children a warning and the tools to heed it. On the view screen, a new ship appeared. It carried volunteers from Earth, people who wanted to join the inheritors and contribute to the mission. Among them might be the 7th bearer, or perhaps just another person willing to stand against the darkness. Either way, they would be welcome. Because this was not about one species or one weapon. This was about all the children of the galaxy standing together against a threat that had destroyed their ancestors. Deho turned to Hana. Ready for what comes next? She smiled. With you? Always. The sword pulsed with blue light one more time, and somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, ancient things stirred. The void was waking. But this time the galaxy would not face it unprepared. The inheritors stood ready, bearing weapons 50,000 years old and hope as new as tomorrow. The sword had chosen its bearer. The legacy had been accepted, and the ancient war would be fought again, but with a different ending. This time the children of the precursors would prevail.